Welcome everybody. This is Hugh Massey, the CEO and founder of DNA Behaviour. I'm delighted today to bring to you our webinar on behaviourally smart family dynamics. This is the fourth one in the series, and we're very fortunate to have my friend Mike Peduzzi from Da Vinci Global Consulting present to us. Mike and I have been friends and collaborators in the area of helping families with managing family businesses and investments, communication, their relationships, governance issues for the last 13 years. One of the areas that Mike focuses on very intensely is not only the issues facing mum and dad or the patriarch and matriarch in passing down the wealth in the family unit. He has also worked very hard on looking at the wealth transfer issues and the family business issues through the lens of the rising leaders or generation that are going to receive that wealth one day, and they have their own unique set of issues that need to be addressed. And so we spent a lot of time with that, and Mike's been very thoughtful in building our programs to help, if you want to call it, both generations in managing this very sensitive area of wealth transfer, family dynamics, and of course dealing with the business. So I'm going to hand you over to Mike now to lead out with his presentation today, which is going to be focused on the family business issues.
Thank you, Hugh, and to Leon Morales and Trip Rockwell and the staff at DNA Behavior for all your help and for the kind introduction. Just briefly, Da Vinci is purely a consulting firm. We don't provide any of the services that financial advisors, attorneys, CPAs, business valuation experts, and the like provide. So we work in a very complementary manner with the family business system, as you see here, and system nonprofits. What we're going to talk about today hopefully will accomplish those things that might be uppermost in your mind as far as business development for your firm. As I go through these slides today, I've provided a lot of content. I'm not going to go through each item verbatim, but hopefully if you get a copy of the slides, it might be helpful as you reflect back on what we talked about today. Today, we're going to cover one of the four areas, the last of the four segments. So far, we've talked about the family, personal and family growth. We've talked about family governance, and now we're talking about the last component, which is the family business. And as we go through this, hopefully it'll give you an idea, if you're not working in a lot of these areas yourself, what's going on in the business and some key areas to make you feel perhaps more comfortable interacting with the business owner and the leadership of the business. But there may be a number of you on the call that actually are experts in some of these areas. So, but I'm going to cover them in an intermediate level or introductory level for those that are not familiar. So the topics we're going to cover today are listed here. The ones that I'll be spending some time on are the ones underlined. A few of the ones like strategic planning, leadership, and team development, which I think some of you may be doing, and the facilitation of meetings and retreats will not be covered today. So let's kind of dig in and just look at what we're talking about when we're talking about businesses. First of all, businesses, corporations have been around for 500 years, but business has been around for as long as there have been human beings. Unfortunately, most corporations are underachievers and they only tap into a fraction of their potential. The average life of a Fortune 500 company is 40 to 50 years, and actually that's gone down some. I just recently read, and if you look at the S&P 500, there are only a few companies on there that have lasted that long. And in other countries, it's even harder to sustain a business. And we all know the story of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, where only 10% of the family survive for into the 3rd generation. One of the factors that go on in businesses, which is a big component, is how they deal with change. And this is really looks like a gobbledygook of information, but it's really that dark blue line that goes and dips down in the middle is just how a business goes through transformational change. And the point to make here is that to get to the next level, oftentimes they have to take a step back. And with you as advisors and consultants working with businesses, you're change agents. And to some extent, you're coming in either to take a company through a change process or help them through a process and to help them to get to the other side without aborting before they realize the potential. So let's talk about organizational governance for just a second. There are a few different elements to it. The one that you all are, of course, familiar with is the board of directors. And I'd like to think of that as a difference in perspective from, let's say, being on the ground looking at what you can visually see versus being in a plane that might be 25,000 miles or more up in the air, 2,500 miles up in the air, and being able to see a perspective of what's going on the other side of the mountain, to be able to see the big picture. And as you probably realize from your work, many companies that are less than 25 million of top line revenue very seldom have active boards of directors or some type of advisory board. And if you're thinking about advising people around exiting their business, this is one area that you want to encourage them to build out and develop. And not just the board of directors, but whether you call them the executive team or the strategic thinking team, are the people that are actually going to take the general guidance of the board of directors and build out strategic plans and business models and execute those, and of course manage the culture of the company, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. Organizational alignment is something I've talked about in another segment, and this is really figuring out why companies aren't more successful than they are. And actually only 30% of business initiatives are considered successful, and that's an astounding statistic. And so what alignment is all about is making sure that everybody can see things in a similar manner as it relates to the why, the what, and the how of whatever project or initiative that they want to do. It's we each think this versus we all think this together. The reason for misalignment is usually perceived as being different value drivers. Somebody wanting to take charge, having a strong perspective of something that they want to ramrod through the company. But in actuality, that's only a small percentage of why companies are not as aligned as they should be. Oftentimes it's as simple as definitional differences. For an example, if you're doing a product launch, what does the word launch mean? Is it a formal launch? Is it just starting a process to launch a product? And then, of course, there's the idea that some people in the organization don't have the same data. So without the same data, it's hard to be aligned and to act as one. So this next chart is, I think, valuable to you as you just think about your business in general. But it also, of course, deals with alignment. And as you think about working with your clients, not only do they have to be aligned, but you have to be aligned with them to be effective. So in order to do that, one thing is important is people have to understand what are the goals, the objectives we're trying to achieve. Now, that sounds obvious, but you'll see in a minute why it really isn't as obvious as it seems. The next thing is, where are they today? What's their current status if you think of your clients? You know, are they aware exactly where they are when they come and see you for the first time and on an ongoing basis? And I know it's a struggle to keep them engaged in these areas. The third thing is, what are the barriers that will prevent a group of people from accomplishing goals? If there's not alignment on that, then people make up various reasons why they don't think it will work, and that will cause them to not act. And so this is, again, looking at something as to why people act and don't act by Chris Argyris, who was a professor at Harvard that passed away, but he was really the father of organizational behavior, and this is the thesis that he worked hard on and was well known for. The fourth area is unintended consequences. So if we're successful, if you're successful getting your clients where they want to go, or if your clients are successful in selling their business, what are the unintended consequences? And so all four of those things are important to have alignment around for you to see people act. If you are seeing clients not taking action on your recommendations, usually it's because there's not clarity around one or more of these four different factors. So as we talk about alignment, people say we're either aligned or we're not aligned, but actually there are degrees of alignment, and we have a proprietary system which measures that. In the 300 plus groups we've measured, the alignment is between 44 to 83 on a 100-point scale, where 100 represents people that are in lockstep alignment. So part of the process is to do various types of things. One is to take all of the opinions and put it in the form of a questionnaire. Here is a sample of our family and business best practices questionnaire, so people can determine how aligned they are to best practices in the family and in the business. We come up with these statistics, which basically say that there's usually about 160 comments or statements around those four objectives of goals, barriers, assumptions, and unintended consequences. So, for example, in something like goals, it's not uncommon in a company to have 66 opinions as to what the goals should be. And this is actually a composite of all 300 groups that we've done. Of that group, only 25 of those comments did everyone agree with. So you had less than 40% of the people that were aligned, and 60% were all over the board. And that's true for each one of those other areas that we just looked at. And if you see in this little graphic, we're looking at how aligned each of these four categories are. And we see here advisors are actually the least aligned among all of the generations and the business. But there's not a great deal of alignment, only in the areas of the low 70s. So there's 30% misalignment that's going on here. So alignment and working in that regard is crucially important, as you know, in any endeavor that you work on. Another area that hopefully you as business people yourselves might be interested in is this concept of a business model. Now, a strategic plan, people would argue, is really actually a business model. And we're not going to look at strategic plans today, but this is something I think you might find very interesting and may want to learn how to do with your clients. The first thing we want to look at is the statistics or just some examples of companies that have failed. And the question is, why did these companies fail? And I think the answer, or the majority of the reason, has to do with that they didn't reinvent themselves. They didn't innovate around who they were and what they were trying to provide to their clients. And someone else swooped in and took their position. Business modeling is critical to be able to be clear as exactly what you're doing from a 50,000-foot level, but also being able to look at the major components of your business clearly, being able to innovate around that, and of course be able to tell the story of your business to other people so everyone is very clear as to what it is that you're attempting to accomplish in your business. There are four key areas that a business model deals with. But let's go ahead and just dig in a little bit deeper here real quickly. A business model canvas looks something like this. And it has the 9 different areas that are important to the success of any business. The ones on the right are kind of the front of the stage, and the ones to the left, the center, are the back of the stage. And so what you could do with your business is to just take this model and be able to plug in the major components and say, this is where we are now, then have your board or advisory board or others come in and say, well, how can we reinvent? How can we innovate around our model? How can we develop maybe a blue ocean type of concept to differentiate at a lower cost compared to our competitors and focus on what our customers and clients need rather than trying to get a one-up on our competitors' business model. So each one of these areas are described here in those little boxes. But as you look at these components, you'll kind of see why being clear about each one of these areas is so important to any business being successful. So again, this will be available to you in PDF form, so we won't be going over all of these bullet points. So organizational culture. I think this is, working with companies, and I would say this, for companies that generally are between 75 to 100 million of top-line revenue, most of those companies, not all, but many of them, are really successful because they execute building widgets or providing services in an exceptional way and provide something that the market sees as being extremely valuable. But that being said, many of those companies are, so to speak, successful in spite of their lack of implementing and using great management techniques and using best practices in business. So when you get to about 75 to 100 million, you started to see companies that are starting to understand the relevance of best practices and being able to use innovative management techniques and implementing business modeling, strategic planning, and all of those different components. But one of the things that also is often lacking is this idea of the company culture. And as Lou Gerstner said here, it says that I came to see in my time at IBM that culture isn't just one aspect of the game, it is the game. And you walk into most companies, you see the mission statement on the wall, but you ask anybody that works there what the mission statement is, and no one will be able to tell you. So culture really is about taking that statement off the wall and putting it into the lives of the employees and do it to be a living, breathing type of document. It's, as it says here, it's how we do things around here, how we think about things around here. Excuse me, is the essence of what a business culture is. And it's the shared beliefs and the behaviors of the people. Let's look at it a little bit more carefully and really just recognize that it's the second bullet point, I think, is the most significant here. And it's the philosophy, it's the driving and guiding philosophy that an organization uses to make management decisions and to have and develop policies towards employees and customers. Now, I want to mention this because I think you having this knowledge will be extremely helpful if you don't have it already, is that most companies struggle with managers making decisions consistent with one another. One manager does it one way, another manager does it another way. The employees become very confused and the organization is chaotic. But if you have a strong culture, your vision statement, mission statement, your purpose statement, that there's clarity about your priorities. What are your driving core values? And when each manager knows those things, they can make decisions consistent with those values. And that's what brings everyone on all the managers and everyone in the company on the same page and reduces the strife that's so common in so many businesses. So it's really the lens, how you see things, how you think about things, even the vernacular of the words you use are all part of the culture. It's how you see things if you're a manager or a leader. And how do you make sense out of what you see and how do you express yourself? So I think what it does is it just reduces tension within the whole company. It provides people an understanding of how things are processed, what the process is, and why is there a process. It drives that continuity, shared identity, and familiarity, which drives esprit de corps, brings strong employee engagement, as does alignment, and really gives the personality, if you will, to the company that everybody can associate with. So we've already talked about some of these things about culture, but really is the difference between failure and success. I don't understand how companies could actually even have a recruiting, hiring, retention program without a strong culture behind it. And it affects every other aspect, as I said, in all the companies I work with. Culture is present in every C-level meeting, and it drives the actions and the thinking of everyone on that group. And without culture, you're going to have a company that's going to have a lot of problems, and with it, you'll have that magic that comes when everybody's aligned and everybody is together. I put down here a number of the components of culture, but I think we've covered many of them, so I'll just move on to another slide. I do want to cover, sometimes people ask me about culture and they think of it as core values and principles, and it is. But I mean, there's different ways to express that. There's the culture, the management culture. It's the culture of how they produce goods and services. It's the customer experience culture. So there's many different dimensions of it. But with any business, there are 4 driving cultures or archetypes, which are listed here. And they are derived from the clan base, which is kind of the family-oriented company where everybody is mentored, all the way to the market-driven company, which is really about being very responsive to whatever the market needs. There's, of course, the hierarchy, the command and control structure that was so commonplace for businesses coming out of World War I and World War II. And then there's adhocracy. Those are the innovative companies, I guess you could say, that are commonplace in the tech industry. But all of them, we go in and we measure the different elements and degrees of where people see the culture, and then we ask another set of questions is where they want to see the culture. And the difference between those two really tells whether or not there's tension going on in the company, or is the company, does it have an appropriate culture for what they are told, what they're trying to accomplish, and how they're responding to external and internal things, and how they are. Some companies obviously need a lot of stability and control, maybe a hospital, where other companies, like tech companies, need more flexibility and freedom. And so in the notes are also the different types of leaders that these different cultures need and the value drivers within that. And I think you'll find that interesting if you get a copy of this and look it over. So I think we're going to be covering now in the next portion, in the final portion, what most of you probably are dealing with in some form or fashion, and that's helping your clients exit their business. And so the exit part really is more about what happens to the current leader, the current owner, as they transition out. And the transition or business continuity part really is how the company survives that exit of the key person. Now, just to look at a couple of statistics here, you see on this chart the wave of people that are going to be at the peak years where they're going to be exiting their business. And the top blue line is combined of the post-World War generation and the baby boomers. And you can see that we basically are at or very close to approaching the peak. There's probably a good 5 years left to still see a growing market for those types of exit planning and transitional services that advisors provide. Not that it'll ever go away, but the peak demand will be there. And so there's going to be, in the meantime, some competition for quality buyers, price pressure, and the need for certainly effective planning. If we look at some other just general statistics about business, is small business to middle-sized markets, comprise the majority of businesses that are out there. 8 out of 10 businesses are family or privately held. 95% of businesses have less than 50 people, and half of that group have from 5 to 50, with the other half having 1 to 4. So 70% of all businesses fail to transition correctly to the next generation, and as we said before, 90% will fail for going to the 3rd generation. So pretty startling statistics. So as we think about and put ourselves in the position of the owner, there's really, 5 different areas that are listed here that are the primary variables that business owners have to think about and contend with in their life and their business. And so we're going to look at them in a little detail. So let's first take a look at how an exit situation impacts the family. So from the family business standpoint, some of the impediments are family businesses. Of course, it varies, and I don't mean to overgeneralize, but many family businesses are focused on making widgets. They're focused on the urgent, not necessarily the important. And that's because they haven't implemented best practices. They don't have an active board of directors or some type of governance structure. So they lack the vision of where they're going. And in this day and age, with change occurring at such a rapid pace, lack of vision can destroy a company. Oftentimes, there's not planning done sufficiently because there's not enough time. I know as advisors, we all struggle with how do we get time with the people we need to meet with to help them what they're asking us to do. Change management. If a company can't deal with change in an effective way in their company, they're virtually doomed to failure. Of course, we all know about the tremendous regulation and red tape of government that makes running a business so difficult these days. And many family-owned businesses don't focus on continually updating and improving the processes and technology. More or less, if it ain't broke, let's not fix it. So those are some of the factors many of you probably experience. So, why is an exit so hard for a person? Well, first of all, there's the psychology, which we all know, of the business. It's a business owner's baby. They've risked many things through their life. They've worked weekends and long hours. And so their identity is wrapped up in their business. So if you ask them to give that all up, then the question is where's my relevance if I do that? Is one thing. And so great exit planning deals with, in a very strong manner, being able to have that business owner and his spouse being able to envision how they remain relevant and move into the next chapter, and that chapter being actually even more exciting than the chapter they're in right now. We also know that business owners have virtually all their money wrapped up, and that's why so many advisors are interested in exit planning, because that's a liquidity event. That's the time they actually will have some money to invest and do other things with. But it's a fearful time for these people because, again, it's what they know and it's where they've made their livelihood throughout their life. And as we know, because the businesses aren't well structured and don't have a great organizational structure and great top management, sometimes they can't run without the business owner's passion and drive to make things happen. So basically, the family business system is represented here, the system of the family, the system of the business, system of the ownership group. So when we're talking about exiting and transitioning in a business, all three of these factors come into play. Where I see the biggest issues in my practice as a consultant is when advisors really go in and really kind of give a little bit of lip service to family dynamics and maybe ask a questionnaire, but really don't take time to sit down with a family over a long period of time. Those of you that have done this type of work know that a business owner needs time to think through iterations of what they want to do. And my experience is they take 6 to 9 months. They go back and forth as to whether they want to transition it to a family member or a internal management group or sell it to a third party. So there needs to be time for this to breathe, and that'll be something we will point out a little bit into the future of our call here. So if we look at these three groups, we see that each one of them, whatever their role is, whether it's family, owner, or employee, all of them have basically the same thing. They want to know, what's the financial reward from me? Who's going to be making these decisions? Who's going to be in control, and is my fate tied to that? What level of access to information about what's going on do I have, and what do I want to see come from this? And so there's 7 different places that somebody could sit in the family business system, and all 7, not really just these 3, are all need to be dealt with and understood, and come up with a game plan of how to work with each one of these 7 seats as you go through the planning process. One thing I want to mention that's a startling statistic that some of you may know, but that after you go through putting together a deal to sell a business, roughly 50% of those deals fall apart at the signing table. So you can imagine all the work and effort, everybody's been there. There was one example that I was involved with. It was an extremely large company. There was must have been 15, 18 advisors, M&A people at the table. It was New Year's Eve, and it was getting into the evening. It was 6 o'clock. The table was full of documents piled inches and maybe in some cases a foot high. And it came down to starting to sign the documents. And the business owner, it was owned by one family, the business owner got up and said, "I can't do it." So you can imagine how painful that is. And the reason is he didn't understand what the next chapter of his life would look like. And he was uncertain. He didn't have clarity. There wasn't alignment. So having that perspective hopefully will help you as you go through working and advising with your clients. Of course, when you're dealing with families, you're dealing with the idea of what's the parents' need versus the next generation that might be aspiring into leadership if it's that kind of transaction. And as you can see here, most parents want to preserve what they have. They've already taken their risk. They don't want to take a chance of losing it. They want to remain in control because they built the company and they don't trust anyone to run it in case they do something that jeopardizes the value of the company. And they want to do things that are familiar to them. They're not interested in innovating new things at this stage of their working life. But those things are just the opposite of the generations that are coming into leadership in a business, and many of the reasons why there's issues between generations because of these differences. Add on top of that the idea that how people are viewed in a family environment versus a business environment are totally different. And what I commonly see is one spouse will be focused on family values, like all the children being equal and treated equally, where the other spouse that's working in the business is really thinking about, well, how do I make it equitable for my children that are rising in the business or those that aren't in the business? So these come into play in spades as you will walk through this experience with any family. And so these conflicts between the family and the business, between owners and managers, between the generations, all have to be dealt with. And really, as it says in the quote below there, all of this comes off the tracks is 90% of the times it has to do with problems with relationships. So if you're spending and focusing most of your time on the technical aspects of the transaction, and which is so very important, but don't give enough weight to the relationship aspects. As I said before, about half of the time, there won't be a decision to move forward, and everybody will have wasted a lot of time and energy and strife as they go through this process. There's, of course, those other issues that come about as that lead to those problems that I mentioned up at the top of the slide there. Chief among them is the inability to understand how to communicate well and how to have difficult conversations. And what are the right people to bring to the table for this particular type of transaction? So that's about the family. Let's quickly wrap it up as we go through just the process of exit and transition planning. And so this really works with 3 different systems. One is there has to be time to restructure the business for sale. Many times, of course, family businesses run a lot of personal expenses through the business. Well, that has to be culled out. The books have to be restructured in such a way that they will make sense to a buyer on financial terms. And it takes time to work on value drivers that will increase the value of the business to get it where it's really primed for sale. That together with simultaneously understanding what are the financial objectives of the family. What do they need to live their next chapter? A financial plan needs to be done. I've worked with a lot of people. I've gone in late. They haven't even done a financial plan to know what it is they need to accomplish in exiting and transitioning their business. And of course, the estate plan goes without saying. And then there's really just the whole idea of thinking through all the many components that go into a person exiting the business and that business continuing on with the successor owner in whatever way that would look like. There's 7 types of steps. You know, some people have 6, some people have 8. So these are the ways, and I tried to put them in some reasonable priority list, although they kind of will simultaneously occur in some cases and may not follow this exact flow. Personal wealth and estate planning, it could easily be the step 2 instead of step number 7. But each of these components will really be important to someone getting to the end result where everybody's happy. And of course, identifying exit objectives is the whole panacea of issues relating to the matriarch and patriarch and other owners and what they want to do. And of course, it becomes very complex when you're talking about only one owner exiting the business, or in some cases, multiple owners exiting at the same time, wanting to sell 100% of the business. And they span in different ages, and each one of their situations is different. Each one has different needs of what they're trying to accomplish. Adds greatly to the complexity. So that's a lot of the human dynamics that if you aren't comfortable dealing with that, or feel like your expertise is elsewhere, you know, of course, that's where you should partner with people that will work collaboratively with you and help you through those issues. Of course, Da Vinci, that's our specialty, so to speak, is working on the human equation, because we look to advisors to provide the technical aspects of tax and law and the like, investments and financial planning. So we've talked about some of these things already as to what needs to take place for a successful exit. I will, interestingly, at the end, you may have experienced this as well. If you walk in and ask a business owner when they plan on exiting their business, 90% of the time they'll say 5 years. There's something about 5 years. I don't know. I guess it's long enough where they feel like they don't have to start doing anything about it now, but not too short of the time because they know they have to deal with it at some point in time. But it's really uncanny that it's always 5 years. But actually, to really do it well, exit planning and the sale of a business, really you should be looking at a minimum of 3 years. So starting out now, even if you have a 5-year horizon for that, it's really not too soon to begin some parts of that process, because you have to groom, as we know, the strong management team, number 4 in the bullet, takes time to develop. And 5 years is really, if you haven't done a lot of work there, 5 years is almost the minimum amount of time, particularly if you're trying to groom rising generations into positions of leadership as part of the transition. So what are the metrics that we want to look at is we need to make sure we have that stable and motivated, the key point there, management team. If you don't handle the transaction right, of course, and management gets wind of it, oftentimes they'll be looking for greener pastures elsewhere, or places where they can be more control of their fate. So doing planning to retain your key management team is vitally important. And many of you on the call have many ways of going about solving that problem for business owners. And then, of course, you need to have the cash flow situation well in hand because that's going to be so impactful, of course, into driving the ultimate sales price. And you want to be able to look at industry benchmarks to make sure your key performance indicators are at or exceeding those types of standards to make your buyers extremely interested in what you are offering. And then, of course, solidifying your client base, making sure that it's properly weighted as far as percentage of what clients drive what type of revenue, and that you have in place a growth strategy so that the people coming in can see that whatever price they pay you it is going to be a great value because they see the potential of the company and that there's already a strategy for growth in place. So the decisions that you have to make, and again, I won't go through these in great detail, but these are all of the things that you would want to guide a person through as they start this process and think about all the different factors that are in play here. There are some various types of questionnaires and things like that are out there, and I think those are valuable tools, but I wouldn't underestimate the idea of just sitting with somebody casually, giving them the time to think through, not rush, but giving them the ability to really think what matters most to them. Don't perhaps take the process of just doing a questionnaire, going through that, and feel like you've adequately covered and addressed the concerns of the key people you're working with. And of course, the last thing I want to cover is that there are many different ways to transition a business, the ownership of the business. I put down just a few of those ways that are listed here that are a little bit more commonplace, but I can give you a list that probably is at least double those different alternatives. But this will, again, be a way for you to start a conversation and be able to just ask the person or go walk through some of the pros and cons of each one of these and to see which ones they actually can execute upon, because they may not have rising generations that have an interest in the business or have the capabilities or yet have the skills. So they may be limited as to what they can do there, and they might not have the type of management team that would allow for an internal sale to a management team. They might not have the time to go an ESOP route or have other obstacles to that, which isn't directly listed here but implied here under selling to employees. So that gives you hopefully an overview for those of you that aren't too familiar with working with businesses, and even those of you that are, hopefully you picked up a couple of ideas and thoughts along the way. So what I'd like to do is tie this into something DaVinci's launching. I'll just take a second for this. Is one of the problems that it seems like almost every family of wealth has is being able to groom the next generation to steward the family wealth and to steward the family business. And so we've developed a 3-year curriculum that is basically similar to some affinity groups where you have 12 peers. In this case, it'd be 12 rising leaders. Those would be for families with businesses, and we have the Rising Generations Forum, which are for children, adult children that have business interests but not necessarily family business interests. And they go through 57 topics that people that are interested in stewarding wealth and businesses to groom them. And it's a very comprehensive program, and it does involve part of the process is we call it the professional advisory team, which presents technical information to these rising leaders in a collaborative team format, so they could see the dynamics that goes on in the benefits of having a multidisciplinary advisory team help them on some issues such as exiting and transitioning a business. And so if you'd like to learn more about that, there is a website. It's www.risingforums.com. That's RISINGFORUMS.com. So with that being said, let me go ahead and open it up to any questions that people may have or any comments. You might have experiences that you'd like to share with the group about something you found helpful. So either way, Trip, if you wouldn't mind seeing if there are any questions at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, usually the typical question of the availability of the recording at the end, and certainly once we've finished up here and processed the recording, that the presentation itself is readily available to everyone that's registered, regardless of attending, and then also all the other three parts of the course are also readily available and made public on the Citrix site, the GoToWebinar site that we host. So that's readily available, and I see that you've got your contact information up there as well, which is perfect for getting a hold of you. So we do have a brochure that goes out at the end as part of the recording being available as an email, and then we have as well the presentation itself that and a survey that goes out as far as how well received the presentation is. We welcome feedback for future opportunities. So with that, we've got we're finished up here, and Hugh's got a few points to wrap things up for us.
So I presume we have no other questions. I just wanted to emphasize a few points that Mike's made in terms of the business in the necessity to have a very solid business plan that's kept simple, that everyone in the business can understand, and also a strong focus on the human capital aspects inside the business, because if the business is built from the inside out properly, they command greater value ultimately when they're sold. And I think the last big point, which is really what we're all about, is recognizing the role of the next generation in the leadership of the business and setting them up for success by developing their talent and also understanding what their perspectives are as far as the business is concerned and the family.
Well said,
Thank you.
And I do want to say, the fact that we're doing this broadcast for DNA behavior, my assumption is everybody's well aware of the great tools that you have to help facilitate any type of change process by helping to understand how people are wired and how people see things, and how groups of people are different in how they see things, and how you could bring those differences together and make for even a stronger understanding, because those different perspectives are all brought to the table and celebrated in their own right in a way that everybody sees them as benefits and not just ways that people act and thinking that those actions in some way lead to are there because there's problems in the relationship. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak to your group in this 4-part series.
A pleasure, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody, for participating. And again, look for the recording in your email box, and look for us next week as we cover team performance that goes along with practice management. And with that, we'll give you a few minutes of your day back. And again, thank you very much. Thanks.